This is the last story I'll ever tell. Not because I've run out of words, but because I'm the only one left to speak them. My name's Mark Dawson. I used to be a truck driver, hauling supplies to remote outposts across Canada's Arctic. Long stretches of empty road, bone-chilling cold, and a solitude so deep you'd swear it could swallow you whole. I thought I knew loneliness. I thought I understood fear. I was wrong. It started like any other job. Load up, drive north, drop off supplies, and head back. Simple, right? Except nothing's simple when you're dealing with the Arctic. The trip was to a town called Black Hollow, a mining settlement wedged between frozen ridges, closer to the magnetic pole than to any semblance of civilization. I'd been there twice before. A quiet, rough place, but warm faces and hot coffee were guaranteed once you rolled in. That's all I wanted this time. A warm bed and 4 walls to block out the storm I saw creeping over the horizon. I left Yellowknife before dawn, my rig groaning under the weight of crates filled with canned goods, medical supplies, and equipment parts. The sky was gray, the kind of gray that pressed down on you, heavy with things unsaid. Snow started falling around noon, fine and sharp like ground glass. By dusk, it was a full-on blizzard. But I kept driving. I had to. There was nowhere else to go. The road disappeared beneath a white blur. I followed the faint outline of telephone poles, my headlights struggling against the darkness, swallowing everything beyond the windshield. The heater blasted, but my fingers still felt like brittle sticks inside my gloves. Every mile felt like another nail in a coffin I hadn't realized was mine. By the time I saw the town's faded welcome sign, Black Hollow, population 214, the snow was coming down sideways, driven by a wind that howled like something alive. Relief washed over me. I'd made it. Shelter, heat, maybe even a hot meal if the diner was still open. But Black Hollow was silent. I drove through the main street, squinting past the wipers. No lights in the windows, no cars, no people. The snow blanketed everything, erasing footprints, muffling sound. I pulled up in front of the general store, killed the engine, and listened. Nothing, not even the faint hum of power lines. Just the wind, screaming like it was the only thing left alive. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out, and immediately felt the cold sink its teeth into me. My boots crunched over packed snow as I crossed the street. The store's front door hung open, banging softly against its frame. Inside, shelves were knocked over, cans scattered like someone had left in a hurry. Blood smeared the floor, dark, frozen streaks that led toward the back room. My stomach clenched. I told myself there was probably an explanation. Maybe an animal attack. Maybe a fight gone bad. But the silence, the complete, suffocating absence of life, screamed otherwise. I followed the blood trail. It led to a body. A man, face down, half hidden behind a shelf. His back was shredded, strips of fabric and flesh torn away, like someone had tried to peel him apart. Blood had frozen in jagged patterns across the floor. His fingers were bent backward, snapped like twigs. I stumbled outside, gasping for air that felt too thin, too sharp. The blizzard had thickened, the world shrinking into a swirl of white noise. I needed to find someone, anyone. I ran to the diner. The door was ajar, snow drifting inside, covering overturned chairs and broken dishes. More blood. A lot more. And bodies. 3 of them, slumped in unnatural positions. One woman's face was gone, just gone, like something had chewed straight through her skull. Fragments of brains oozing on her blood-stained dress. I backed out, slipping on the icy floor, my flashlight flickering. My truck was still there, the only thing that felt real in this nightmare. I sprinted for it, my breath ragged clouds in the frozen air. But just as I reached the cab, I saw it. Movement. At the edge of the blizzard, something shifted. A figure, tall, impossibly tall, slender, with limbs too long, bending wrong. It was pale, almost blending with the snow, but its mouth, Jesus, that mouth. It stretched from cheek to cheek, filled with rows of jagged yellow teeth, not human, not even close. I fumbled for the door handle, slipped, cursed, then finally got inside, slamming the door and locking it. My heart hammered, like it was trying to escape my chest. I killed the interior lights and ducked, peering over the dashboard like a scared little kid. The thing was closer now, moving with jerky, unnatural speed. It didn't walk. It glided, its long arms swinging low, claws dragging through the snow. It stopped near the diner, sniffing the air, then tilted its head like it was listening. I stayed, frozen, too scared to breathe. The blizzard howled louder, rattling the truck. The creature's head snapped toward me, its mouth splitting wider, too wide, like it was smiling. Then it moved, fast, straight for the truck. The creature's sprint toward my truck was the most horrifying thing I'd ever seen. Arms and legs pumping with unnatural speed, claws carving deep gouges into the snow as it closed the distance in seconds. I scrambled to start the engine, fumbling with the keys, my fingers numb with fear and cold. The ignition clicked, sputtered, then roared to life just as the thing slammed into the side of the cab. The impact rocked the truck, metal groaning under the force. I yelled, profanity leaving my mouth that would disgust a Catholic nun. I threw the gear into reverse and stomped on the gas. The tires spun uselessly over the icy road before finally catching traction. The truck jerked backward, swerving slightly, and I caught a glimpse of the thing's face illuminated by my headlights. Pale skin stretched too tight over sharp bones, black eyes sunken deep into its skull, and that mouth, that impossible mouth. Rows of jagged teeth dripping with blood. It didn't flinch. It leaped. The windshield spiderwebbed as it crashed against the glass, claws scratching, searching for a weak point. Its long fingers splayed out, nails like shards of obsidian scraping with a shriek that cut straight through my skull. I gunned the engine, shifting into drive and slamming my foot down. The truck roared forward, throwing the creature off. I didn't stop. I drove through the town, past dark houses with doors hanging open like broken jaws, past bodies half buried in snowdrifts, their frozen faces twisted in silent screams. The blizzard swallowed everything beyond the reach of my headlights, turning the world into a white void. But I couldn't leave. The storm was too strong, the road already vanishing beneath waves of snow. I barely made it a few hundred yards outside Black Hollow before the truck bogged down, tires spinning uselessly in a snowbank. I cursed, slammed my fists against the steering wheel, then killed the engine to conserve fuel. Silence crept back, broken only by the wind. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it could anchor me to reality. My breath fogged the cab, the cold seeping through every crack, biting into my skin even with the heater's residual warmth. I couldn't stay here. I would eventually burn through all my fuel and have no choice but head back to town. There was no way I was getting unstuck from the snowbank, and that demonic-looking thing was out there. I grabbed my flashlight, stuffed a hunting knife into my coat pocket, more for comfort than defense, and stepped out into the storm. The cold punched me in the chest, stealing my breath. Snow swirled around me, blinding, disorienting. I could barely see the outline of the town behind me. I had to go back. I stumbled through knee-deep snow. The wind howled like distant voices, whispering warnings I didn't want to hear. First place I reached was the church. its steeple barely visible through the storm. The front door was slightly open, creaking softly. I slipped inside, closing it gently behind me, plunging me into darkness. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the blackness. Long benches were overturned, hymnals scattered like fallen leaves. Blood streaked the floor, leading up to the altar, where something or someone had been dragged. My light followed the trail until it landed on a figure huddled in the corner. A man. Alive. His face was pale, eyes wide with terror, blood smeared across his shirt. He clutched a fire axe, like it was the only thing tethering him to life. When he saw me, he screamed, a high broken sound, swinging the axe wildly. Hey, I'm not one of them, I shouted, raising my hands. The man froze mid-swing, panting, his eyes darting between me and the door. You're not. His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the wind. No, I said, stepping closer slowly. I'm Mark. I was making a delivery. Got stuck in the storm. What the hell happened here? The man took a deep, shivering breath, his grip on the axe loosening slightly. It came out of nowhere. The snow. It wasn't just a storm. It brought something with it. He shuddered, glancing toward the door as if expecting the creature to burst through at any moment. They got sick. They all started to change. People, my friends, they weren't normal anymore. They tried to kill me, Peter said, his eyes glancing back and forth between the door and windows. Hey, relax. It's gonna be okay. What's your name? I asked. Peter, he whispered. I was the mechanic. Peter, I said gently, we can't stay here. It's not safe. He nodded slowly, like his brain was just catching up to the words. We left the church together, bracing against the wind. The storm had eased slightly, enough that I could see outlines, buildings, shadows, and something moving. We ducked behind a snow-covered truck as the creature prowled down the street, its head snapping side to side, sniffing the air. Its breath steamed in the cold, mingling with the mist of blood staining its mouth. It wasn't alone. Another one emerged from the blizzard, just as tall, just as horrifying. Peter's hand tightened on my arm, his nails digging through my jacket. There's more, I breathed, my voice barely a whisper. They come with the storm, he replied, eyes hollow. We waited, hearts pounding, until the creatures disappeared into the white. Then we moved, creeping from shadow to shadow, heading toward the town hall. If anyone else was alive, they'd be there. It was the only place with a generator, the only place with hope. As we crossed the street, Peter stumbled, his foot catching on something buried in the snow. I turned my flashlight down. A face stared back, frozen, lifeless, mouth stretched in an eternal scream. I yanked Peter to his feet, forcing him to keep moving. But deep down, I wondered, was it even worth it? Were we already dead, just too stubborn to realize it? The town hall loomed through the blizzard like a half-forgotten nightmare, a squat concrete box with boarded-up windows and a single steel door scarred by deep scratches. As we approached, my flashlight's beam flickered over more dark stains in the snow, patches of crimson red, half buried under fresh drifts. Peter pounded on the door with the butt of his axe. Let us in, he rasped, his voice brittle with cold and fear. For a moment, nothing happened. The wind howled, carrying distant echoes. No, not echoes, footsteps. Then the door creaked open, just a sliver. A pair of bloodshot eyes peered out, wild and suspicious. Who the hell are you? A woman's voice demanded. Survivors, I shouted over the wind. A distant shriek cut through the blizzard, high and piercing, like metal being torn apart. The door flew open. Inside, now. We stumbled in, the door slamming shut behind us, plunging the world back into darkness. I bent over, gasping for breath, trying to steady my heart. A generator hummed faintly somewhere below, casting flickering lights from a few battered lanterns scattered around the room. The woman who'd let us in was tall, with sharp features and a blood-streaked jacket. She held a rifle with white-knuckled hands. "Names," she barked. "Mark," I managed. "Truck driver." "This is Peter, mechanic." She eyed us both, her gaze lingering on the blood smears on Peter's coat. "Not ours," I said quickly, raising my hands. "We're not sick or whatever you're worried about." She didn't lower the rifle. Another voice spoke from the shadows, softer but no less tense. "Claire, let it go. If they were changed, we'd know." A man stepped into the light, older, with a thick beard and a limp. His name, I'd later learn, was Jones. He'd been the town's deputy, before the town stopped being a town. Claire finally lowered the rifle, but her eyes stayed sharp. "Don't make me fucking regret it." I nodded, too exhausted to argue. The room was a makeshift refuge, with overturned desks and chairs piled against the windows. 3 other people huddled near a propane heater. An elderly woman clutching a rosary, a teenage boy with blood-soaked bandages around his leg, and a young woman staring blankly at the floor, her face ghost pale. 7 of us, that was it. Jones handed me a flask. I drank without asking, grateful for the burn of cheap whiskey. "What the hell happened here?" I finally asked, wiping my mouth. Jones' jaw tightened. "We don't know. The storm hit fast. Then people started disappearing. At first, we thought it was accidents, folks getting lost in the blizzard. But then we found the bodies. Or what was left of them," Claire muttered. I thought of the shredded corpse in the general store, the diner, the blood-soaked snow. "They're not human," Peter whispered, still shaking. Jones nodded grimly. "We've seen them. Tall, fast, and smart. They hunt like wolves, but they're not just after food. They turn you. They get inside of your head. One bite or a scratch from these bastards will change you eventually. Could be minutes, hours, we don't know." A heavy silence settled over us, broken only by the soft crackle of the heater and the distant wail of the wind. I looked at the others. The kid with the injured leg was named Ryan. He winced every time he moved, his face slick with sweat. The elderly woman was Shelley. She didn't say much, just whispered prayers under her breath. The young woman was Sarah. She hadn't spoken since we arrived. Jones caught me looking. "She saw her family die," he said quietly. "Not much left to say after that." I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. "What's the plan?" I asked, needing something, anything to focus on. Claire gave a bitter laugh. "Plan? You think there's a goddamn plan? Look around. Everyone is dead. If they weren't ripped apart by those monsters out there, they turned into them already." Jones shot her a look. "There's always a plan," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He spread out a crude map of the town on the floor, weighted down with empty cans. "We can't stay here," he said. "The generator's running low on fuel, and once it dies, we're done." "They don't like the light." But in the dark, he trailed off, shaking his head. "Where do we go?" Peter asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Jones pointed to a building on the edge of town. "There's an old radio tower. If we can reach it, we might be able to get a signal out. Call for help." It was a slim hope, but it was all we had. We agreed to wait until dawn, not that it made much difference this far north. The sun barely crested the horizon, even on clear days. And with the blizzard still raging, it would be little more than a faint glow in the gray sky. I tried to rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Every sound made me jump. The groan of the wind, the creak of the old building, the distant scrape of claws on ice. At some point, I dozed off into a deep REM sleep, dreaming I was out of my physical body, hovering over myself, watching me sleep. That's when I seen one of the creatures walking over to me slowly, unnatural, ready to attack. And just before it was about to leap at me, I woke to screaming. Ryan was gone. Blood smeared the floor where he'd been, a trail leading to the shattered window. The barricade had been half torn apart from the inside. Claire fired her rifle into the darkness outside, her face twisted in rage and grief. Jones pulled her back. Save it. They're gone. We were down to 6, and they knew where we were. The cold seeped into my bones, deeper than it ever had before. Not just the chill of winter. This was something worse. The kind of cold that crept into your veins, hollowing you out until you felt like nothing more than an empty shell. Ryan's blood was still fresh on the floor, a dark smear leading to the shattered window, disappearing into the white void beyond. Jones was the first to move, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He kicked over the broken barricade, cursing under his breath. Claire stared into the darkness, gripping her rifle like it was the only thing tethering her to reality. Sarah hadn't even screamed. She just sat there, her blank stare fixed on the window where Ryan had vanished. They got in, Peter whispered, his voice trembling. They didn't just get in, Jones growled. Ryan let them in. I spun toward him. What are you talking about? He pointed at the barricade. The boards weren't smashed inward. They'd been pulled aside from the inside. The nails were still bent outward. Ryan was bitten, Claire muttered. Maybe it did something to him. A sickness settled in my gut, heavier than fear. Could the creatures change people? Was Ryan even Ryan when he disappeared? Or had something hollowed him out from the inside? Jones didn't waste time on speculation. We leave. Now. We gathered what little supplies we had, a few flashlights, Claire's rifle, my knife, and a rusted crowbar Jones found in a supply closet. Jones also had his .357 Magnum revolver. Shelley clutched her rosary like it could shield her from the horrors outside. Sarah didn't move until I gently tugged her to her feet. She followed without a word, her eyes glassy and distant. We stepped into the blizzard, the cold like a slap in the face. The storm had eased slightly, but the darkness felt heavier, pressing down from all sides. We moved in a tight group, flashlights cutting narrow paths through the swirling snow. Every shadow looked like it could hide something. Every sound made us flinch. The radio tower was a mile away. A mile might as well have been 100. We trudged through knee-deep drifts, past houses with dark windows like empty eye sockets. The town was a corpse, and we were picking our way through its frozen guts. Halfway there, Shelley collapsed. I turned just in time to see her fall face first into the snow, her rosary slipping from her fingers. Blood bloomed around her like a dark flower. Claire screamed. A shadow moved, fast, too fast. Jones fired his revolver blindly into the storm. The muzzle flash lit up the surrounding area for a split second. And what stood there? A tall, pale creature, its mouth stretching impossibly wide, teeth glinting like broken glass. Then it was gone. Shelley didn't even have time to scream. Her body was just lifeless, laying face down in a pool of blood. We ran. I don't remember much of it. Just flashes, snow blinding me, the sound of Claire's ragged breathing beside me, Peter tripping and Jones dragging him up by his coat collar, Sarah stumbling but not crying out. She didn't make a sound. Not once. The tower loomed out of the blizzard, its rusted shell reaching into the gray sky. A small utility shed squatted at its base. The radio shack. We burst inside, slamming the door behind us. Jones shoved a metal filing cabinet against it, though it felt like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. The shack was freezing, colder than outside, but at least it was shelter. A dusty old radio sat on a desk, wires snaking into the floor. Jones lunged for it, flipping switches, twisting knobs. Nothing. Static hissed, thin and distant. "Come on," he muttered, banging his fist on the panel. Claire paced like a caged animal, her rifle clutched so tight her knuckles were white. Sarah sank to the floor, staring at nothing. Peter slumped in the corner, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Then, the static shifted. A voice crackled through the speaker, faint, distorted, but real. "Hello? Anyone there?" Jones practically ripped the mic off its stand. "This is Black Hollow. We need help. There's something out here. They're killing us." The response was slow in coming, just more static at first. Then, "Copy. Who is this? What's your situation?" Jones glanced at us, his face pale with desperation. "We're survivors. 5 of us. Something's in the town. It's not human. We're at the radio tower." A pause, then, "Hold position. Help is coming." Relief crashed over me so hard I almost collapsed. Help. Someone knew we were here. Someone was coming. But Claire wasn't smiling. "That's not right," she whispered. Jones frowned. "What do you mean?" She shook her head slowly, her eyes narrowing. "They didn't ask the right questions. Who we are, how many injured, what supplies we have. That's not how rescue teams talk." The radio crackled again. "Don't go outside." We froze. Jones lifted the mic. "What? Who is this?" Static. Then, faintly, "It's not the cold that will kill you. The power cut out." Darkness swallowed us. Something hit the shack like a wrecking ball, metal groaning under the force. The door buckled inward, the cabinet skidding across the floor. Claire fired blindly, muzzle flashes strobing the nightmare. I saw it for a split second, pressed against the shattered window, its face inches from the glass, mouth gaping wide, claws raking the frame. It burst through the glass, then it was inside. I tried running for safety to the corner of the room, but something blindsided me, sending me flying a few feet in the air, smashing my head against a metal cabinet, knocking me unconscious. I don't remember much after that. When I came to, the shack was quiet. Jones was dead, his throat torn out. Claire was gone. Peter was slumped in the corner, missing the lower half of his body, blood pooling around his corpse. His eyes were open, but he wasn't breathing. Sarah was still there. She stood in the darkness, her face blank, staring at me with eyes that didn't look human anymore. Sarah's eyes glinted in the faint light creeping through the cracked door, reflecting something inhuman. Not just fear or shock, something deeper, hollow. Her pupils were too wide, swallowing the whites, and her face was slack, expressionless like a discarded mask. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, raw from the cold and screaming. I managed a hoarse whisper. "Sarah." She didn't answer. She just stared. I pushed myself to my feet. My head throbbed, and when I touched it, my fingers came back slick with blood. The shack reeked of copper and burnt gunpowder, the air thick with something worse, something I couldn't name. Sarah tilted her head slightly, like the creatures had when they hunted, listening to sounds only they could hear. "No, I backed away slowly, stepping over Joan's broken body. His face was frozen mid-scream, eyes glassy and unseeing. His gun was still clutched in his hand, slick with blood. I grabbed it. Sarah didn't move. Her lips parted, just enough for me to see her teeth, stained red, jagged like they'd been broken and sharpened. "What happened to you?" I croaked. She blinked slowly, then finally spoke, her voice soft, distant. "It's in the blood." My heart began pounding rapidly. "They get inside," she whispered, almost like she was comforting me. "Not just in your body, in your mind." I raised the pistol. My hands were shaking so badly I wasn't sure if I could pull the trigger even if I wanted to. Sarah didn't flinch. "They're hungry," she said, taking a slow step toward me. "But it's not just for flesh. They eat everything." I fired. The shot was deafening in the tiny space, the recoil jarring my already bruised arms. Sarah's head snapped back, and she crumpled like a rag doll. Silence. I stood there, shaking, the pistol hanging limp in my hand. My ears rang, but underneath the ringing, I heard something else. Scraping. Outside. They were still there. I didn't wait to find out how many. I grabbed Joan's backpack, half empty but still holding a flashlight and a flare, and shoved the pistol into my coat pocket. Then I kicked open the battered door and ran into the storm. The storm picked up again, rapid and intense. Cold hit me like a wall, stealing my breath. Snow swirled around me, blinding and suffocating, but I didn't look back. I ran through the emptiness of Black Hollow, past houses that once housed memories full of life, past bodies frozen mid-scream. My lungs burned, my legs screaming with every step, but fear pushed me harder than I'd ever run in my life. I didn't have a plan, just one goal: survive. Somewhere behind me, I heard them. Footsteps, snow crunching, scraping claws, skittering fast across ice and snow. The sound of hunger. I spotted my truck through the whiteout, half buried in snow, but still there. A lifeline. Even though it was stuck, I thought, maybe I could hold up there and hide in the cabin for a while. Maybe by some miracle the truck would move. I dove for the cab, yanking the door open with frozen fingers. I fumbled my keys out of my pocket and into the ignition. I turned them. Nothing. Dead. I screamed, slamming my fists against the wheel. The driver's side window darkened. One of them was standing there, its face pressed against the glass, mouth stretched impossibly wide, teeth glinting like ice. I didn't think. I grabbed the flare from my pocket, snapped it to life, and pointed it at the window, waiting for the creature to burst through. I grabbed the revolver and aimed at its head. It smashed its head through the window and reached for my arm. I emptied 3 rounds in its skull, blowing its brains out across the steering wheel. The creature recoiled and fell back on the snow-covered ground. Its skin began evaporating and catching on fire, its body spazzing on the ground, jerking in all different directions. I could see more creatures circle around the truck. I raised the revolver out of the window and let off 2 more rounds until it was empty. One of the creatures ran up to the window, and I flashed the flare in its face, sending it screaming back into the storm. They don't like the light. A spark of hope flared in me, fragile and desperate. I grabbed the rest of the flares from under my seat that I'd stashed, lighting another and holding it out like a weapon. I couldn't stay here. I jumped out the truck, flare in my right hand, pointing at the demonic creatures like it's a bank robbery. They circled me around in the storm, shadows flickering at the edges of my vision, but they didn't come closer. I remembered the supply depot on the outskirts of town, an old metal structure with fuel reserves and maybe even a snowmobile. I ran. The flares hissed in my hands, casting long, trembling shadows. The creatures followed, always just out of reach. The depot was there, the side of the walls covered from the storm. I burst through the entrance door, slamming it shut behind me and wedging a rusted metal bar across it. Inside was dark, but I didn't need light to find the fuel cans. The sharp, oily scent filled the air. I had an idea. A terrible, desperate idea. I poured the fuel in a wide arc around the door, soaking the walls, the floor, everything. The last flare flickered in my hand, sputtering weakly. The creatures scratched at the door, their arms smashing through the front windows, their claws scraping like knives on bone. I positioned myself towards the back emergency exit. I whispered a prayer I didn't believe in, then I threw the flare. The fire roared to life, hungry and violent. The heat hit me like a wave, but I didn't stop to feel it. I kicked open the emergency door, the cold, a blessed relief against the heat behind me. I crawled into the snow and didn't look back until I was halfway across the field. The depot was an inferno, flames licking the sky. I saw them burn. The creatures writhed in the fire, their screams inhuman, high-pitched wails that echoed through the empty town. I collapsed in the snow, too exhausted to move. I sat there for a bit to catch my breath. When I was ready to move, I started walking away from that godforsaken town. I didn't know if the creatures were all gone. I didn't care. I just kept moving. I don't remember how I made it back to civilization. I walked for miles through the endless white, following the outline of the highway road, half dead with cold and hunger. I found someone eventually. I flagged down a pickup truck that was heading to the nearest town. People thought I was crazy with all the shit I told them. Maybe I am. But I'm alive. I'm the only one, and I can still hear them sometimes in the dark corners of my mind. Hungry, waiting. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Descent into the Unknown for more horror content. If you have any real cryptid encounters, or you're a horror writer wanting to share your stories, please feel free to email me in the description anytime.